Russian forces have seized Ukraine's second biggest power station. The Vuchlehirska power station is the latest setback in the eastern Donbas. The area around the capital, Kyiv, has come under missile attack for the first time in weeks. But in the south, Ukraine says a counter-offensive is gaining ground.
From the ruins of this hotel, rescuers pull a man from the rubble, alive. Not everyone was so lucky when Russian rockets hit Bakhmut on Thursday. The city in the Donetsk region has been hit again and again by indiscriminate Russian shelling, part of Moscow's stalled efforts to claim Ukraine's east. But in the country's south, Kyiv says a counteroffensive is moving forward. The city of Kherson fell to Russian forces early on in the war. Ukraine is now stepping up efforts to retake it. Kyiv says it's knocked out the strategic Antonivsky Bridge. This would help isolate Russian forces on the river's west bank, away from their supply lines. There is significant damage to the bridge and its structure. We think that the enemy will try to repair it again. We are prepared for this, and you will soon hear about our next steps. Posting on Telegram, an official for the Russian-appointed administration said the bridge was still functional, while referring to Ukraine's armed forces as Nazis, as is common in the pro-Russian camp. The bridge is blown up. Everyone rejoices. But these are just illusions. None of the Nazis will ever enter Kherson. The destroyed bridge, which you can see behind me, still exists, and objectively speaking, this hysteria by Ukrainian Nazis won't change the outcome. The fighting over this strategic crossing is more than just a war of words. Ukraine says its forces will repair the bridge eventually, but first they aim to liberate Kherson.
Let's take a look at some of these matters with Justin Crump. He's an intelligence and security expert and CEO of the intelligence consultancy Sibylline. Welcome back to DW. Let's start with that Antonovsky Bridge. How damaged is it? How much of a problem is this going to be for Russia?
It is significantly damaged. I think there's been some confusion. People looked at images on social media and you can see the series of holes in the top layer of the bridge. And it's not immediately clear. It's not like it's collapsed or anything like that. But certainly when you speak to structural engineers about it, the integrity of the bridge has been severely damaged over that span. And I think the biggest proof is the fact that Russia is now using boats towing pontoons with vehicles and supplies on it instead of using the bridge. So I think just judging the evidence of what we've seen today, that's how they're now having to cross the river, which certainly suggests they don't think they're going to get it back into operation quickly if they're having to resort to that. And as a kilometre-long bridge and the main route of supply for their forces in the city, obviously that's a pretty significant setback for them. And they only have two other options as well, and both of them are damaged too. So Russian troops from the 49th Army on that bank of the river probably feeling pretty anxious at the moment about their resupply situation.
Right. And resupply has been a big issue for Russian forces throughout this conflict.
Absolutely, yes. And that's been aggravated, I think, by loss of ammunition supplies in recent days with donated equipment that I expect we'll talk more about. But, in this particular incident as well, they've been struggling to get ammunition forward, fuel forward. They're limited in the range of their trucks. And of course, the more stretched it gets, the more it slows down Russia's ability to mount offensives. And we've seen that in the Donbas. Now, obviously, in Kherson, it's different because they're on the defensive there and they will have built up supplies in that area. And they've been moving troops to that part of the country to defend. But nonetheless, as you get into the point that they're consuming more ammunition, food, fuel, that's now all got to come across the river currently by boat and pontoons. And that is obviously cutting down the flow substantially from what they have seen previously.
And it does seem as though Kherson is likely to be the next big point of conflict. Russia is sending reinforcements there and Ukraine talking about trying to retake it.
Yes, and Ukraine's been talking about that for a long period of time, but they definitely seem to be building momentum now towards a more effective offensive in that area. it's the obvious place to choose. The river is at the back of the Russian forces there. That makes it hard for them to defend. Now, we talked about that situation before with the city of Severodonetsk in Luhansk, and you might remember Ukraine defending that about a month, 6 weeks ago, in the same situation for them. At the back of the round, sorry about my dog noise, at the back of that house, he had the from being at home this time of night. They had that particular problem there where the dogs were in the back. The river was back of them and they couldn't cross it. So that's something that the Russians have got in turn, and it makes them very vulnerable in Kherson. They have these major problems. Again, that's the only place they really have that at the moment on the Russian side, and it's very important for Ukraine to take the city and stop it, potentially from having a referendum in September where it would join the potentially vote to join the Russian Federation, what we think would be a rigged election. So that's pretty important timing for Ukraine at that point to do that.
Another of today's developments is Russia's capturing of this Vuchla-Hirska power plant, Ukraine's second biggest, on the day that Ukraine talks about providing the EU with power over winter. Do we presume this not to be a coincidence?
No, I think they've been trying for that power station for a while. I mean, it's been long contested. I think Russia managed to box their way around it. It's interesting. It is the most significant non-nuclear power station in Ukraine, but it has routinely been out of operation due to its position in the Donbas and on the front lines. And interestingly, right at the start of the war, and this was already scheduled, but Ukraine actually switched its grid pointing towards Europe, whereas previously it was pointing towards Russia. So the value of that power station actually to Ukraine has certainly fallen off because they're now able to go onto the European grids, and that's how they've been able to make good the loss of not only that station, but more importantly, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is the biggest in Europe, probably about twice the power output of this older station in the Donbas that's been captured now. So it's sort of symbolically important, but I'd agree with the Ukrainian assessment that it's a tactical game for Russia. It's not a big strategic thing at this point.
Out of Ukraine itself, the UK has started several weeks of training for the first cohort of up to 10,000 Ukrainians, they say. Is that likely to make a difference? I wonder about why you would take them out of the country to do this rather than have them there and on hand.
Joe, it's a very important point because it's not just about donating equipment. You've got to train people how to use it, and particularly as you talk about Ukrainian counterattack, to do that at a higher level than actually we've seen anyone operate in the conflict in terms of using your troops and your equipment together to effect, rather than piecemeal attacks that we've maybe seen from Russia in the Donbas, does require a lot of preparation. So again, it's not about giving, say, 36 missile launchers. If you can't crew 36 missile launchers, you might as well have given 4 that can be crewed, 4 more. So the training is vital, and it taking place outside the country is really important, because where training was taking place in the country, those people could be targeted, and it's using up Ukrainian assets in training who could be on the front lines. So actually the donation of training support away from the battle area allows people to work harder on training. They're getting professional support. It's not using up Ukraine's experienced people training their new people. So that's been a really important advantage, I think, to allow that to take place. And often overlooked when we talk about equipment donations is that other part of actually being able to use what you're getting and work together to a better effect. And I think the proof for Ukraine will be in whether or not they manage to mount an offensive rather than counterattacks in Kherson itself, and to what scale that will be mounted at, and how well coordinated that is compared to earlier in the conflict.
As ever, very clear. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us your time. Thanks to your dog as well, Justin Crump of Cymbeline.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Let's talk through some of these developments with Michael Desch, who's Professor of International Relations at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana. Welcome to DW, Professor. How do you read those two
Good to be with you.
Thank you. How do you read those two big gains by each side today? Ukraine bombing the Antonivka bridge in Kherson and Russia's capture of the Vuchla-Hirska power station, Ukraine's second largest.
Well, I think neither of them are really decisive in terms of military operations that are turning into a slow grind. The big issue for the Russians in the Donbas is to be able to push Ukrainian forces far enough away from the city of Donetsk to take it out from under Ukrainian artillery attacks, which are going on every day. Conversely, the Ukrainians are making a lot of the supposed offensive to take back Kherson. And they have struck the Antonovsky Bridge a couple of times with HIMARS attacks. On the other hand, the bridge is not destroyed, and there are other ways over the river, including a roadway on top of a dam about 40 kilometers to the northeast. And now pro-Donetsk television is showing video pictures of the Russian military building a pontoon bridge across the river. So I
Right.
think the Ukrainians are making a lot of the attack on the bridge, but it's not clear that it's going to, really materially aid their ability to take back Kherson.
It's not decisive, as you say, and the two sides do seem to be heading for confrontation in Kherson, with Russia said to be redeploying troops from Donbas and Ukraine gearing up to retake it. How do you think that will end?
Well, that is going to be the real test of the Ukrainian military because they will be on the offensive, attacking Russian and Russian allied forces who will be on the defensive. And the Ukrainians have not conducted an operation like this successfully. And I think that they're doing it quickly because they feel the need to show some progress on the battlefield. And I think, if they achieve some success, they'll use that to make the case that they can win the war. If they don't achieve success, I think they'll be arguing that they need a yet greater infusion of NATO and American military technology.
OK. And of course, the world is waiting to see whether this agreement over grain exports can be successfully implemented without bombs falling or arms being smuggled into Ukraine. How do you see that going?
I think both the Russians and the Ukrainians have a mutual interest in the grain moving out. On the other hand, the Russians want to make the point that, while they're willing to agree to allow Ukraine to transport grain, they're not going to slow down their attack on other sorts of targets, including targets in port cities like Odessa. And so what it suggests is that the future of the war will be quite complex, with some areas of agreement, whether grain or POW exchanges, moving ahead. At the same time, continuing hostilities occur.
Good talking to you. That's very clear. Thanks for joining us. Michael Desch, Professor of International Relations at the University of Notre Dame.
My pleasure.